Today's day 7 of the Karen Read trial. I'm going to give you my daily recap. We have Jen McCabe back on the stand. She is Karen Read's nemesis. In one of the ID documentaries, Karen Read said, either I'm going down or you are. So I was expecting bombshells out of today once cross-examination happened. I'll get into that, but Hank Brennan is still on the stand questioning her for the beginning. And I don't know if you guys know, but I do take notes every single day. I take a picture of the notes that I take on my phone on my son's little iPad. So I'm going to be reading all of the notes. Parts of the 911 call are played and admitted into evidence, and Brennan wants to know, why did you use the term man in the snow instead of Boston police officer, my friend? And she says that she wanted to get the info in as quickly as possible without giving a ton of details. He was bleeding from the face area, but it wasn't like active bleeding. And she called her sister immediately after getting off the phone with 911. Her sister did not answer. And then Carrie asked her to take over chest compression. So she did that until the EMTs arrived. While Hank Brennan is questioning her, it's very storyteller mode. She still has her gorgeous blowout and her spray tan, and she's answering everything eloquently. It does sound like she has been prepped. She remembers some of the officers' names that were on scene. She does know some of them, like Detective Lank. An officer that was there thought it would be helpful if Karen sat in the back of a cruiser, and Jen went with her and sat in the back of the cruiser. Carrie was close by then. At that time is when Karen asked her to Google hypothermia. She says it was her and a first responder standing there, and Karen Read said, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. And Jen didn't know why Karen was saying that. After that, Officer Lank asked Jen to go wake her sister. She went through the front door. It was unlocked. She tells an elaborate story, like they were asleep. She woke them up. She didn't want to startle them. And they told them to wake up, everything that was happening, and come downstairs. When they all go downstairs, Officer Lank was in the house. He interviewed Nicole and Brian, and then her husband, Matt McCabe, also arrived. More of the dash cam is played to identify herself. We've seen this several different times. After that morning, she never spoke to Karen Read again. Brian Higgins showed up on the scene that morning too, and eventually she went home, and Trooper Proctor ended up coming over to her house to interview her and her husband. The day after, she went over to Meadows Ave, which was John's house, to give support to the family. And she rode with Carrie Roberts, and then they all went to Michael Lank's house. And that's when Carrie and Michael Lank's wife talked, and we heard about that during Carrie's testimony. Eventually, she did sign consent to give over her phone and have it downloaded, and Brennan is done questioning. It's Alan Jackson's turn for cross-exam. This is the moment we've all been waiting for. We were all expecting fireworks. We were all expecting something, and I did not get much. I'm not going to lie. There were a few points that I was like, ooh, wow, like that landed, but there really weren't a lot of like, wow, bombshell moments for me. Maybe it's because I know so much about the case, but I do feel like he exhausted a lot of his energy on the same type of questions. He also sounded sick. I put that in my notes, kind of like me, a little congestion. The Boston allergies are getting to him. Like the other witnesses that he's interviewed, he wants to know when the last time you spoke with some of the people in the investigation and involved in this were. She spoke to Carrie Roberts last night. It wasn't about testimony, according to her. Claims that they have not talked about testimony in the past year. They've discussed the case and what happened, but they have not discussed like their testimony and what they've said on the stand. Jackson wants to hit the point that they have been communicating, and that has changed their perception of the reality of what happened, and she doesn't agree with that. He wants to know how many times she met with the DA's office to prep for this trial, just this one, not the previous trial, and she said maybe 4 to 5. Did Brennan ask you any questions about your demeanor for this trial? Did he ask you to be more soft? She says no. And then we start getting into who she knows and the logistics of everybody that was involved in that evening. Her sister is Nicole Albert. She has 2 other sisters that they talk about later. She's very close to Brian Albert too, who is Nicole's husband, and she's known Brian since kindergarten. Brian's brother is Chris, and she's close with Chris. She's close with his wife, Julie, and they're all kind of like a very tight-knit family. And then Jackson makes the point that like Karen Read is not family. She's not from Canton. You didn't grow up with her. And she's like, correct. Alan Jackson starts questioning her about another agency that came to her home to question her. He's not allowed to say it out in court in front of the jury, but we know that it's the feds because there was a federal investigation into this case. So he says it wasn't Canton PD, it wasn't Mass State Police, it was another agency. You knew that if you lied while speaking to them, it was a crime, even if you weren't under oath. And she says yes. But basically, we get to the details of what happened with this. And she says that they called and they said, we're coming over to question you. And she said, I need 10 minutes. In that 10 minutes, she called her husband, Matt McCabe, and she called Carrie Roberts. Jackson's trying to figure out, why did you call Carrie Roberts? Was it to like get your story straight or why? And she says it was just to see if they had came and spoke to her yet. The agents also asked if she contacted anybody besides Matt and Carrie before they started interviewing her. And she said no. They ended up leaving. They left a card. Her husband, Matt, came home and he was like, hey, you said you also called X and X and X. You need to call them back and tell them that you told that because that's technically a lie. And she actually ended up also calling in that 10-minute window Peggy O'Keefe. She called the district attorney's office. She says it was because she wanted to speak to her witness advocate. And she called her brother-in-law, Brian Albert. This is all new info. This federal investigation was going on during, I believe, the first trial, and it happened a little bit more later, like after the first trial ended. Now we're getting into January 28th, finally, after a few hours, and he wants to know if she has ever seen Brian Albert and Brian Higgins that night, if they were getting physical, and she said not that night, she didn't see it, but there was video footage, and she thought they were play fighting in the video, and she has seen that. So they're all at the waterfall. The mood is great. They're all having a good time. And she said the bar closed around midnight. And she said to Karen, hey, you should come with me. Her and Karen were hanging by the door. She went and waited outside for Karen. And then I guess John ended up coming to the door. So she was like, okay, just ride together. When she got to the house, she went in the front door. When she arrived, there was also a Jeep parked in front of the mailbox on the street when she had arrived. He bounces around a little bit at this point because he starts talking about the morning after and if Brian Albert was there for her interview with Trooper Proctor, and she said yes. Pretty much everyone had talked before they were interviewed. They were never sequestered or anything. They were interviewed separately. And then we get into a little bit of a bombshell. Questions about the dog Chloe. She says yes, it was a big dog. It was a German Shepherd. She knew that the dog did not like people. It couldn't be around her dog. When she went to wake up Brian and Nicole, Jackson said, you didn't use a quiet voice to wake them. And she says no, but she didn't want to startle them and give them a heart attack. But he raises his voice to prove that she was yelling probably to wake them. And she said yes. And he goes, what was the dog's reaction? And she said, I don't recall seeing the dog. Jackson says, the dog wasn't there, was she? And she was like, I don't remember the dog. I don't remember seeing the dog, etc. Then immediately after, he says, who was the last person to leave in the early morning hours of the 29th? And it was her niece, Caitlin. Then we talk a little bit about Julie Nagel because she's the one who texted her brother to come. And so they talk about placement of the cars. Near the flagpole was Karen's car. Then it was the Jeep that belonged to Higgins. Then it was Ryan Nagel's car. And she said that eventually she asked Julie Nagel for a screenshot of that text with her brother because she wanted to know for her timeline. I'm going to send you guys to part 2 because I don't want to rush through this last part. So go to part 2.